Okay. Okay, we're all set.
All right. Thank you, Peter. We're here this afternoon for the meeting of the Executive Committee of the North Carolina State Bar Council. It's my responsibility to remind members of the committee that you're advised of your duty under the North Carolina State Government Ethics Act to avoid conflicts of interest or the appearance of conflict. And you're instructed to refrain from participating in any matter coming before this committee with respect to which there's a conflict of interest or an appearance of conflict. If anybody is aware of that and would like to put anything on record, we can certainly do that now.
Andrea?
Yes, I was not at the appointments committee yesterday, but it's my understanding that my brother might be recommended today for a position. And so I would like to recuse myself for that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Anyone else that would like to put anything on record? All right. If not, we'll proceed with the meeting. We have folks had an opportunity to review the minutes that were posted on EDDS to see if there were any need for changes or alterations to them.
I
If
move for
not,
adoption of the minutes as presented.
Thank you, Mark. There's been a motion to adopt the minutes. Is there a second?
Second the motion.
Thanks, John. If any further discussion? If not, those in favor, please vote on your screen, yes or no, as to your for that motion.
That's unanimous.
All right. Thank you. Moving on, the next matter has to do with the financial statements from the Finance and Audit Committee. Barbara, is that?
Yes, the financial statements for third quarter were posted with your material EDDS, and it is the motion of the Finance and Audit Committee to approve those statements.
Okay, motion of the committee does not need a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, please vote on your screen indicating your acceptance of the financial statements for the third quarter.
That's unanimous.
All right. You have that about?
I do. Yes, and it is the motion of the Finance and Audit Committee to set the dues for 2021 at the maximum of $300.
Motion doesn't need a second. Is there any further discussion of that? If not, those in favor of that motion, please vote on your screen, yes or no.
Unanimous.
Okay. And
Okay.
it is the motion of Finance and Audit to set the assessment for the Client Security Fund for 2021 at $25.
Okay. Motion of the committee doesn't need a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, those, please vote on your screen, yes or no, your acceptance or rejection of the motion.
Unanimous.
Thank you. All right. Meeting dates. The meeting dates have been recommended by the executive director for the coming year. It's up to us to establish those for each year in advance. Good. I would entertain a motion to accept those as the dates for our meeting for the coming year of 2021.
So moved.
Thanks, Matt. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second the motion.
Thank you. There's a second. Any further discussion? If not, please vote on your screen for your acceptance or rejection of that motion.
That's unanimous.
Thank you, sir. Appointments Committee, Barbara.
Yes, thank you. The first item was an appointment to the Client Security Fund Board. And the Appointments Committee had a recommendation yesterday, but when we checked with the nominee, she indicated, she let us know today that she's not interested. And so rather than trying to fill that, what we would like to do is just wait and reconsider that matter at the January meeting.
Okay, fine.
The next matter was the appointment of the chair and vice chair of Client Security Fund. And it is the recommendation of the committee that Erwin Fuller be appointed chair and Tom Lunsford vice chair.
All right. Motion of committee doesn't need a second. Is there further discussion? If not, those in favor of that motion, please vote yes, and those opposed, no.
Unanimous.
Thank you, sir. Barbara?
There are 3 appointments to be made to the Board of Law Examiners. And all 3 that currently hold the seats are eligible for reappointment and interested in reappointment. It is the motion of Appointments Advisory to reappoint Roger Askew, George R. Hicks, and Judge Ned W. Mangum.
All right. Motion of the committee doesn't need a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, those in favor of the motion, please vote yes, and those opposed, no.
Unanimous.
Thanks, sir.
The next item was the Board of Continuing Legal Education. There are 3 appointments to be made. Robert C. Kemp III is eligible for reappointment. And it is our motion that he be reappointed. And I'll just go ahead and deal with all these at once. There were 2 other vacancies, and it is the motion of Appointment Advisory that Paul Capua and Judge Ashley Parker Dunstan be appointed to those seats.
Okay. Motion of the committee doesn't need a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, please vote yes or no for on this motion.
That's unanimous.
Thanks, sir.
We also considered the appointment of the chair and vice chair of the Board of CLE, and it is the motion of our committee that George R. Jenkins be reappointed as chair and Judge A. Elizabeth Keever as vice chair.
Okay, the motion of the committee doesn't need a second. Is there further discussion? If not, those in favor of that motion, vote
Mr.
yes. And those
President.
opposed- Yes, sir.
I know I'm not a member of the committee, but my middle initial is L, not R.
We're going to definitely do a name change, I guess, George, so we'll, well, thank you. We appreciate getting us straightened out on that. George, it is in our minutes as R, but we just made a slip of the tongue. Thank you.
That's fine.
Anything else? All right. Those in favor of George Jenkins and Beth Keever, please vote yes, and those opposed, no.
Unanimous.
Thanks, sir.
Our next item was an appointment to the NC Legal Education Assistance Foundation, NC LEAF. There's one appointment. William Purcell is eligible for reappointment, and it is the motion of the committee that he be reappointed.
Doesn't need a second. Any further discussion? If not, those in favor of the motion, please vote yes, and those vote no, opposed, no.
Unanimous.
Board of Paralegal Certification, there are 3 appointments to be made, 1 lawyer appointment and 2 paralegal appointments. The current folks are all eligible for reappointment, and it is the motion of the board that we reappoint Russell Neighbors, Sarah Kaufman, and Lakeisha Chichester.
All right. Doesn't need a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, those in favor, please vote yes, and those opposed, no.
That's unanimous.
Thank you.
All right. And for the Board of Paralegal Certification, it is the motion of Appointments Advisory that we reappoint Warren Hodges as chair and Brian Scott as vice chair.
Thank you. Doesn't need a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, those in favor of the motion, please vote yes, and those opposed, no.
That's unanimous.
Thank you.
And
Roll, Barbara.
okay, the final item we had was 2 appointments to the Judicial Standards Commission. And I will say that we just had a lot of very highly qualified candidates, but it is the motion of Appointments Advisory that we appoint Michael Kroll, Chapel Hill, and Michael Grace, Winston-Salem.
Doesn't need a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, those in favor of the motion, please vote yes, and those opposed, no.
Unanimous.
Thank you. All right. Is anything further for the Appointments Committee, Barbara?
There's not.
Okay. All right. Next, we have proposed amendments for publication. The first one involving a matter that was just recently reviewed by the Board of Continuing Legal Education. Peter, would you kind of enlighten us about the background and what's happening with that?
Yes, thank you, Colin. The CLE board has been quite busy since July when our chair, George Jenkins, who is here today, appointed a subcommittee to study whether there should be the creation of a new CLE credit type of training called that we have called the Diversity, Inclusion, and Elimination of Bias Training. The CLE subcommittee consisted of Chief Judge Linda McGee, Professor Jim Drennan, George Jenkins, our own Dorothy Harrison Mitchell, and J. Dixon Phillips, who's a member of the CLE board. That subcommittee met 3 times. We heard a presentation from Chapel Hill lawyer James Williams, and the committee studied what other states are doing in this area and looked at language that other states are using. And the CLE subcommittee recommended a proposed rule amendments to the full CLE board, which met in September and October. The CLE board met twice considering these proposed changes and voted to propose these amendments to the rules for this executive committee. The first amendment is the amendment that would create the definition of a diversity, inclusion, and elimination of bias training. That is in your materials on page 83. The second proposed amendment is the rule, what we are calling a temporary rule, that would, in your materials, there were 3 options. This is option 3 on page 86. It is a temporary rule that would require this type of training for all lawyers in the CLE year of 2022. Instead of determining how this rule should be implemented in perpetuity, the CLE board wanted to implement the rule in 2022 and give themselves some time to look at our entire CLE structure because we are building a new database and developing new regulatory management. It might be time to look at our CLE rules in a broader perspective. So in the short term, the CLE board is proposing that in 2022, there's created a requirement for all lawyers to take diversity, inclusion, and elimination of bias training as defined in rule 0.1501.
George Jenkins, George is here as the chairman of that board. Would you like to give us your thoughts, George?
We had several recommendations. As Peter said, this is just a temporary answer to an issue that we think has existed for some time. And in the current climate, we think it's necessary that the bar address it. The presentations that we had indicate very strongly that there's a need for it amongst the entire bar, and we recommend it most highly.
Thank you.
If I might add, Colin, that this temporary rule, as you'll note on the footnote on page 86, the CLE board has an intent to establish an ongoing requirement for this type of training. We're just unsure how it will look at this point.
And this was for 1 hour of the CLE during the year 2022.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have any questions about this? Is there a motion that we recommend to the council that this be put out for publication? I don't know if, I guess coming from the board, does it need a motion in a second or?
I'm happy to make the motion in case.
All right, thanks, Mark. If you'll make a motion, is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, moved and second. Any questions or further discussion before we vote? If not, those in favor of this publication of this proposed amendment, let me know by voting yes on the screen, and those opposed, no.
And that appears to be unanimous.
Thank you. The next matter that's up for consideration of publication, I think, is a proposed rule change that would allow the bar exam to be given in locations other than Wake County, given the current COVID pandemic. I think the Board of Law Examiners anticipated that it might be necessary to have alternative locations to do that in order to do it safely and in compliance with regulations that are out there. So this would be to remove the requirement that all the exams be administered within Wake County and change that to that they be administered within the state of North Carolina. Is there a motion as to publicate that we recommend to the council for publication of this amendment?
I'll move that we do so.
Thanks, Andrea. Is there a second?
Second.
I
the
will
motion.
second.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion before we vote? If not, those in favor of recommend the council for publication of this amendment, please let me know by voting yes, and those opposed, no.
That's unanimous.
Thank you. The next matter deals with proposed amendments that were published after our July quarterly meeting, and of all the amendments that were published, the only ones for which there was the law students, the advertising rules, changing our fee structure from about the charging fees for responding to a grievance. The only one for which we received comments that were not favorable were for acceptance were as to the preamble. That I would think it'd be appropriate at this point to recommend that to the council that we send all of these except the amendment as to the changes to the preamble to the Supreme Court for their approval.
I'll make that motion.
Thanks, Mark. The motion is made. Is there a second?
Second the motion.
Thanks, John. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All right. If not, all in favor of that motion of recommending the council that they all be sent to the Supreme Court except the proposed amendment of the preamble, please let it be known by voting yes on the screen, and those opposed, no.
That's unanimous.
Thank you. Looks like next up is a litigation report. Catherine?
Thank you. Thank you. So we learned this week that a plaintiff who has a lawsuit pending in the Eastern District against the United States has sought to amend his complaint to add either the State Bar or the North Carolina Bar Association as another defendant. It's not a case that has any merit, but I wanted to let you know since it's not in my litigation report. Other than that, I'd be happy to answer any questions about what is in the litigation report. You'll notice that we don't have any pending or authorized AP litigation included right now. But I'd be happy to answer questions about any of the items on that report. Okay.
Does anyone have any questions of Catherine of issues about the report? We don't need
Thank
to
you,
take,
Mr.
it's not an action item that we need to accept to that, is it? Or,
No, sir.
okay. Thanks.
Colin, I don't have a question for Catherine, but on the prior item, my motion was to submit everything but the preamble. Are we going to take up the preamble separately, or is the thought that we'll take that up at a different time? I'd like clarification on that.
I think the issues ethics committee this morning, I thought had sent that to the subcommittee for further review. And I don't know if Bill Mills or I think David had to be out this afternoon for something with a client, but and I don't know if Brian Oaten, if Brian's on the call, he can answer that. But I thought during the ethics committee they'd rather than try to send that on, they had, because of the number and complexity of the issues, they thought it was more appropriate to send it to subcommittee for further discussion.
That's correct, Colin. It
Okay.
got sent to subcommittee, and it's being sent to the subcommittee that's already in existence, that's currently studying the potential adoption of anti-discrimination language in the rules of professional conduct.
Yeah, I think the 8.4G amendment had gone to that committee, and I think since the issues were similar, that the thought was maybe that both of those issues should be looked at by that subcommittee.
Olin, if I could just comment.
Yes, ma'am.
On the procedure here. Technically, it was the council that voted to publish this for comment, so it's coming back to the executive committee. But the normal process is to send those comments to the committee that generated the original rule amendment and take their recommendation on what to do. So the recommendation here is basically from the ethics committee to allow its subcommittee to study this further and that it not be moved forward towards, approval by the Supreme Court or anything like that.
Should we entertain a separate motion as to the preamble about that, given the way we did it?
It would be consistent to basically have the motion that pursuant to the recommendation of the ethics committee, it will be returned to the committee for it to make a further recommendation.
Okay. All right. Do we need further action or did what we do adequately address that?
I think you need a motion to return it to the ethics.
Okay. Is there a motion by someone to?
So moved.
Okay. Thanks, Ed. To return this to the thing. Kevin, thank you. Second. Any further discussion? If not, then those in favor of the recommendation that this be returned to the subcommittee by the ethics committee, let it be known by voting yes, and those opposed no.
I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for asking the question. I think that helps us get it right.
That carries.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, I think next was the issues committee. Darren,
Yep.
Sort of full plate.
All right. So at the beginning of the year, President Willoughby charged the Issues Committee with looking at access to justice issues. We have 3 subcommittees that have been working hard since the beginning of the year. The first one is the compensation of court-appointed defense counsel, looking at the issue of the payment of lawyers who represent indigent defendants in both civil and criminal court. Judge Alan Cobb is the chair of the subcommittee. I don't believe he's on this call. I looked just a minute ago. In any event, they have had presentations by Mary Pollard and Whitney Fairbanks. Mary Pollard is the executive director of the Indigent Defense Service Commission. And also Whitney Fairbanks at the time was the interim executive director. They were both asked to bring forward additional information to the subcommittee, and they did so. And one of the things they were asked to do is bring to the subcommittee sort of the product of a session where they brought in their staff and tried to figure out ways that the state bar might be able to help and assist them in this venture of trying to get adequate compensation for court-appointed attorneys. That committee is still ongoing. I anticipate that at this juncture, what we're going to do in that subcommittee is review the information that has been provided by Indigent Defense Services, and we will continue our work to see how we can fit that into our regulatory scheme. The next subcommittee is proportional discovery. And just as Gray Wilson will be leaving the officer's position tonight, he also is leaving the proportional discovery subcommittee because they have, in essence, decided that at this point in time, there isn't a need nor a call for there to be additional rule changes with regards to Rule 26 of the Rules of Civil Procedure as it relates to proportional discovery, much like the federal courts have instituted some time back. So that subcommittee has finished its work and awaits further instructions with regards to whether or not there become any more issues dealing with civil discovery. The next, if that subcommittee had a short life, this one is going to have a long life, and that is a subcommittee to study proposed regulatory changes in other jurisdictions. Mark Enriquez is the chair of that. Mark, I'm going to recognize you just briefly to just explain where you guys have been and what the next step is, if you would.
Sure. Thanks, Darren. I'll be brief because I think many of you have either heard my report and many of you have attended some of our committee meetings. But our goal was to really study what's going on in other jurisdictions. So we've had 4 good meetings so far. I think they've each been 2 hours in length. Brian provided a great overview to kick us off, looking at what's happening in a number of different states. Bill Henderson, a professor who spent a lot of time looking at these issues, talked to us about why these changes are taking place and how he sees it impacting the access to justice issue. Then, to get a better understanding of what the real needs are in North Carolina, we talked to folks at Legal Aid and the Equal Justice Project to really understand what the North Carolina needs are. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of unmet needs. I think that was an interesting and enlightening discussion. And our most recent meeting was with Jeff Ward, who heads up the Duke Center for Law and Technology. We are exploring how there might be technological solutions to try to help meet access to justice needs, and in particular, whether there's regulatory implications that we should think about. I think now that we've kind of educated ourselves on broadly what's happening, what the needs are, we're going to start focusing on some specific and interesting ideas. I know Alice has already been in touch with someone in Utah. They've adopted this thing called the regulatory sandbox, which certainly sounds like fun. We're going to learn about how to play in the sandbox, what kind of sandcastles you can build, and get a better understanding of what that really means. I think at our next meeting, probably early November. I think we're also going to be looking at the idea of limited legal professionals. You may have heard of triple LTs. There's various designations, but the idea would be, can we either empower our current paralegals to do some things that might otherwise be the practice of law, maybe in a narrow context like family law or certain types of civil cases, or create some new licensure designation that's somewhere in between a paralegal and a lawyer, kind of like a nurse practitioner role, where people could do certain things, maybe in a different regulatory structure. So I think we're going to do a meeting on that idea and whether that's something that might fit in North Carolina. And then we're going to be maybe taking up some of the other regulatory changes that other states have looked at. So it has been a long and good educational process. just as a reminder, we're not going to be coming with any specific proposal to say, change this rule or do that. I think instead we may say, here are a few ideas that maybe you on another committee to look at what it would be to implement. So we may say, hey, regulatory sandbox is worth exploring. I don't think we'll have a specific proposal on what it would look like. We'd leave that to others in terms of implementation because we are just a study committee. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you, Mark. And he's doing a great job with that committee. That's a lot of sort of going in a lot of different directions, and he's pulling them all into a center. And again, Mark's done a really good job of emphasizing that this is a study and not a committee that's going to come forward with something for us to act on at this point in time. Before our July meeting in June of 2020, the officers received a letter from the LAP board asking us to look at, and they titled it a diversity and inclusion memorandum to the officers. The officers under President Willoughby's instructions and Alice's steady hand reviewed that. Alice had, there were a number of suggestions or requests that the officers look at. Alice was able to do some investigation on some of them, found that they might not be appropriate. Some of them were found to be appropriate for someone else to review. And what was left over was essentially about 6 or 7 points that we are looking at with regards to possibly staffing a subcommittee in the issues committee to look at. These items are establishing a diversity and inclusion committee or staff person to evaluate and promote initiatives to bar leadership at both the council and staff levels, research and adopt policies that support diversity or do not disproportionately adversely affect minorities. We're looking at committing to a diversity and inclusion 360-degree association scan for the state bar. Again, these are items that the subcommittee will study and not necessarily come forward with a recommendation that we do them. We're just studying them at this point in time. And there is an initiative to better promote diversity at the district bar level to increase the number of minority members on the council, examine the council structure to determine whether it is disproportionately adversely affected on solo or minority lawyers, and to evaluate a way to address these disproportionate impacts, and then champion and promote Black and other minority bar counselors for leadership positions in council. And those items are going to be they're up for discussion with regards to whether an issues subcommittee will be reviewing those. And I think Barbara will be making that decision along with the other officers. So that would be the report of the issues committee.
Thanks, Darren. Thank you. Y'all have been busy this year. You're doing some heavy lifting with some really important things. Thank you for the work they've done. Anyone have any questions for Darren or about issues committee work? If not, next on John Willardson here. John, I think we canceled the meeting this time. Is there anything that you wish to report about the legislative committee?
John, you're muted.
I'm sorry for that. There really is nothing substantive to report. Peter and I conferred and decided to cancel the meeting. We're hopeful that in January there will be substance and we can and have a proper meeting of the legislative committee and a full report.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Kevin, the authorized practice committee.
Thanks, Colin. The committee met yesterday. We reviewed 18 complaints and inquiries for action. The committee issued letters of caution in 11 matters. The committee also voted to refer 1 matter to other regulatory authorities. The committee dismissed 5 matters. The committee closed the files with no action in 1 matter. The committee voted to recommend to the executive committee that it authorize the state bar to seek injunctive relief in one matter. I'll come back to that in a minute. The staff registered amendments to 22 existing prepaid legal service plans. Staff reviewed one prepaid plan for initial registration. The plan was not accepted. And now I've got two action items that I'd like to bring to the committee's attention. The first has to do with prepaid legal plans. The committee voted to ask the council to revoke the registration of My Family Plan LLC as a prepaid legal service plan. The plan failed to file an annual registration statement and pay the annual registration renewal fee. The plan owner died, and neither the attorney for the plan owner's estate nor the only participating attorney for the plan believe that the plan continues to operate in North Carolina. On behalf of the committee, I move that the registration as a prepaid legal service plan of My Family Plan LLC, plan number 09PP0019, be revoked.
All right, we have a motion to revoke the authorization for My Family Plan LLC, or does it need a second? Are there any further questions? If not, those in favor of that motion, please vote yes on your screen. Those opposed, no.
That's unanimous.
Thank you. And your
Thank
other
you.
member, Kevin?
Yes, so the committee also considered file number 20 AP0017 regarding Ms. Tammy R. Alexander. Ms. Alexander is an independent paralegal. She attempted to intervene to review one inmate's case who was represented by counsel. She also attempted to file expungement pleadings on behalf of another criminal defendant directly with the senior resident Superior Court judge. Ms. Alexander appeared before our committee yesterday, was given an opportunity to be heard, and offered her explanation for her conduct. In response to several questions and inquiries by the committee, she informed the committee that she does not intend to stop trying to advise inmates and seek relief on their behalf. After hearing from Ms. Alexander, upon motion duly made and seconded, the committee voted to recommend to the executive committee that the state bar seek an injunction against Ms. Alexander. And on behalf of the authorized practice committee, I so move.
All right. Motion of the committee doesn't need a second. Is there any further discussion on this? Anybody have questions for Kevin? If not, those in favor of requesting authorization to bring injunctive relief against Ms. Alexander, please let it be known by voting yes on your screen, and those opposed, no.
That's unanimous.
Thank you, President Willoughby. That concludes the report of the authorized practice committee.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. Communications Committee, Heidi Bloom.
Thanks, Colin. The Communications Committee met on Monday afternoon and thankfully did not include the exposure and disclosure of my bare feet as the Grievance Committee did. We had a good discussion of the things that had been accomplished during the third quarter, which included 14 meetings being live streamed. And although we probably have not yet reached Kardashian level, our followers are growing, and there has been interest from our constituents and lawyers across the state in viewing those meetings and reviewing the meetings even after they've been held live. So there was real progress there, I guess, as is much in the virtual world these days. We discussed the status of the database project, the software project that the bar is undergoing to basically consolidate a lot of lawyers' information in one place, whether it's CLE or specialization, and what the timeline of that looks like and the benefits look like for our members and for the lawyers in North Carolina. And I think that's going to be an amazing improvement and development for all of us, actually. We also discussed what we've got coming up in the way of communications. In addition, obviously, to this quarterly meeting, we have several podcasts planned, including one with Colin and Marcy on Monday. Barbara will get her turn later in December. and a couple of others in the works that we're pretty excited about. We discussed some additional topics, more substance of things that we would like to do, because I think we'd really like to get the podcast idea off the ground. It's a good way to communicate. It's a good way to get folks interested in what we're doing and understanding all the work that we do. And I hope that those will be successful. And then the final thing that the committee talked about was sort of the status of the technology in our building. Obviously, the State Bar building went live, I might get my dates wrong, but in 2012 or 2013. Technology has changed significantly since that time. And it is the opinion of the committee that perhaps it's time to review the technology that is in the building. Obviously, live stream has been a big thing, but for the gifts of both Peter and Brian and their personal devices, a lot of it we wouldn't be able to do. So we are hoping that we can take a review of the technological aspects of the building and evaluate whether or not there are ways and ways that we can improve the technology of our State Bar building. And that is the report of the committee.
Y'all have been busy, and it's kind of amazing. The stuff that you're doing is, I mean, we're kind of keeping up with the times, it seems to me, with podcast and our communications. You really have moved forward. Thank you, and all the folks on the committee for that. We appreciate it. Courthouse access, Tom, anything you want to talk about that, or are we sort of in a...
There's not much to say, Colin. We did have one telephone conference. There was a proposal to have a joint committee with the Conference of Superior and District Court Judges, the Sheriff's Association, bring in AOC and the clerks. The consensus of the committee was that should wait until after the election to see who is going to be in charge. So we hope to have a meeting after the election and before the next January meeting. That's all.
And I will tell you that in our meeting with officers with the Chief Justice this week, we did sort of put on notice that as courthouses began to open back up and we got back to normal, that this issue was something that we were still concerned about, and we would love to get the help from AOC about making this happen. Thank y'all for staying on that.
Yes.
PMBR and cyber, Walter and Eben, y'all want to talk?
Yeah, I've been tapped with this one, but I wanted to say to Heidi on your podcast, if you have any lawyers, just make sure they don't disclose any information that was acquired during or in relation to any representation. There's a 1.6 opinion coming out that really puts a blanket prohibition against lawyers disclosing any information, even including court orders, publicly known orders. So just be careful on your podcast.
Good to know. Thanks.
All right. PMBR, still a committee in search of a good name. When we started this pandemic year, this committee wasn't necessarily mission critical, but we have worked along with some very good members with the joint committee with Walter's group. We met last week, and we're headed in the right direction. We're trying to develop a product, a self-assessment tool on cybersecurity that's workable and meaningful, and as Catherine Fry says, wantable. That comes later. I think we need to create a workable and meaningful product and then make it wantable. But we've split up into 6 different subcommittees on subject matter issues. Each subcommittee tasked with trying to develop a series of questions and tools and drop downs and secondary materials that can be useful to lawyers as they work through a self-assessment on cybersecurity. The last question I asked everybody at the end of the meeting last week was, should we go forward with this? Because it is a big lift and a big task. And the consensus was yes. Everybody thought it was something that really we should focus on. So this is going to go into next year, Mr. President, and maybe beyond. So to infinity and beyond. I don't know if Walter wants to add anything on that or not, but Walter?
Evan, excellent report. I have nothing to add.
All right.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Anybody
Thank you.
come up with a good name yet?
My question is, how long did the AVO subcommittee go, and have you passed our record yet?
I don't even think they're close. Oh, great. Thanks. It's, the joining of you folks together really seems to be, the synergy seems to be working, and we're happy with that and dealing with what's going to be an issue for years to come, I'm afraid. Do we have any other new business before we get a report from Distinguished Service Awards Committee? Is anybody aware of anything? And I didn't know we may need to be in closed session for that, but Charles, if you want to recognize you from.
Thank you, Colin. Yes, sir, we do have a couple of nominees, and so that I would move that we go into closed session pursuant to General Statute 143-318.11A2 to prevent the premature disclosure of an honorary degree, scholarship, prize, or similar award.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second the motion.
Thank you, John. Moved and second. Any further discussion? If not, those in favor, please vote yes. Motion, and those opposed, no.
That motion carries.
All right. Thank you. Charles?
Thank
If you give me 1 second, Charles, I've got to
Okay.
turn off the live stream and kick out some people, put them in the waiting
Sure.
room.
Sure, Peter.
Okay, we're ready to go.
All right. Back in open session, we've heard a report in closed session from the Distinguished Service Awards Committee, and a motion for one nominee for the Distinguished Service Award. There needs no, it's a motion of committee, needs no further second. Is there any further discussion? If not, those in favor of accepting the recommendation and nomination of the Distinguished Service Award Committee, please let it be known by voting yes, and those opposed, no.
And that's unanimous.
Okay. Is there any other business to come before the executive committee before we adjourn?
Remind everyone to join us in 30 minutes for our virtual reception.
Good. Gray Wilson's bar tab. There we go.
I also know, I know David Allen couldn't be here. Obviously, the work of the Advertising Amendments Committee has concluded with the adoption of the various changes that we acted on. But I just wanted, as Vice Chair, to thank David for his service on that, because I think that committee is now officially done.
Yeah, great work. Lengthy, but great work.